Hello everybody, I hope you're doing brilliantly. So today we're going for Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney, and I think he's a genius, to be honest, and he's inspired me in a lot of my own work. And while I don't usually love nature poems, I love the extended metaphor in this one, which we'll get into in a second. But first let's look at the poet Seamus Heaney himself. So Seamus Heaney was Northern Irish, which is relevant, and I'll come to why in a second. And he also lived a pretty rural life, which means he didn't live in cities really ever. He was also much more used to being surrounded by the natural, which is very clearly echoed here. He was a fantastic poet, so much that he taught at Oxford for a while, and he was very inspired by romantic poetry. For example, William Wordsworth, Shelley, etc. Wordsworth who did the prelude, so it's very clear that there are similarities between the two. And romanticism as a genre, I have an entire video on it, so if you want to check that out, you can. So here's the bit that I keep saying I'll talk later about. Ireland and the Troubles. So this poem is set around the islands known as the Aran Islands, which were often battered by storms, and it can absolutely be read as an isolated poem about just the power of nature. That's fine, but it also is really, really helpful to know, especially if you're going to go for the higher grades, that this is also about political turmoil that was going on as the poem was written. So this poem is a bit of an extended metaphor for the Troubles in Ireland, and an extended metaphor is just, a metaphor that takes up the entire length of a text. But what actually is the Troubles? So there was quite a lot of conflict in Northern Ireland at this time because there were kind of two types of people. There were loyalists who wanted to remain part of the UK, and there were Republicans who wanted Northern Ireland to become part of the Republic of Ireland. There was so much aggression and violence involved here, and it was like a civil war almost. Many people were killed and wounded, but it is still referred to as a low-intensity conflict. Perhaps Heaney here is trying to make us rethink this. We're seeing all kind of violent verbs and using words like we to make it seem as though there were a lot of people affected. But also, you might have heard this already, but the parliamentary building in Ireland was actually called Stormont, which is, of course, the first 8 letters of the title. And Ireland is actually a homophone for Ireland, almost, which is probably on purpose too. So about the structure, it's a dramatic monologue, of course. A dramatic monologue is just where someone or the narrator is talking to someone that isn't actually seen or heard. But apart from that, we have that it lacks a rhyme scheme, except it doesn't. We also have slant rhymes and half rhymes. So some letters of the words are the same and some aren't, which could reflect how they're kind of only half prepared really, because you can never be fully prepared for a battering like that. It's also blank verse, consistent meter, which reflects how the wind and rain is a constant battering and beating, just like the beats of the lines. And then lastly, we have a volta, which is essentially just a mood change or a situation change, and this happens where there's a but no and then there's a caesura. Anyway, let's have a little look a bit more on the analysis side of things. So we are prepared. There's potentially too much confidence in this declarative. And a declarative is essentially just where you're not asking a question, you're not exclaiming, you're not stating anything, you're simply declaring something. It usually has a full stop on the end, but it can be other punctuation, like a colon too, like we have here. And we also have we as a collective personal pronoun. Are is interesting because it's focusing on the present, so we haven't got the future involved yet. And towards the future, especially towards the end of the poem, we see that they're a little bit more frightened than they let on. So I think the caesura also breaks up the line to put the emphasis on we are prepared, which actually turns out to not be true. We have squat, which also means short and wide and able to withstand the blows of wind, and the fact that it's built like this and not temporarily altered suggests that this is a regular thing. But also, there's no farmland. It's a barren landscape. Weirdly, it says the earth never troubled us, with fertility and agriculture like hay, stacks, stooks, and this is a bit of a juxtaposition, because surely lively agriculture would be a good thing in most places because it connotes sustenance and nutrition, but in this case, on this island, it's seen as more negative. They literally haven't got anything to lose. The word never as well is an interesting one because it holds kind of the most intense form of negativity. And the word company, I think this is something that is noticed less so, but the word company is repeated in this poem twice. Clearly, company is something that is desired in this situation, which just goes to reinforce the isolation. Because all this narrator has for company is the nature about them, and the nature isn't even fertile. We also have blows full blast, which some of you might have noticed is alliteration, but something more specific is that it is plosive alliteration. And plosive alliteration is just where you have a more harsh kind of alliteration, so it would be P or D or B. And the B's in this phrase kind of mimic the blowing and bombarding of the situation going on, and the caesura straight after really emphasises the word blast as the first word of the line, separated from the rest. Of course, we then have you know what I mean. So Heaney is relying on colloquial language to get these points across, possibly because the narrator is unable to articulate themselves any other way out of fear. Or maybe it's because he's actually so used to the situation going on that he can kind of relax and be colloquial. I don't know, it's, whatever you want it to be, there's no right answer. And then we have a tragic chorus, and for me, that kind of evokes the sensory image of a funeral choir or something. As a whole phrase, this is personification because, trees can't chorus. But focusing deeper, we can look into the word tragic because this is associated with melancholy. We can even focus on chorus because a chorus is when people work together to produce a sound. But interestingly, there are no trees and there is nothing around, so it kind of seems a little different. There is no real intention to scare, which almost makes it stranger. Interestingly, there is a kind of detachment from the storm by calling it the thing. Is the narrator distancing themselves from it because they're scared, or because they're maybe a little in denial about what's going on? It definitely would make sense for the more political side of the analysis. And speaking on the political side, I think referring to it as the thing makes it a lot broader. It could mean the storm, but it also could mean things like the conflict. We also see pummels, which of course has a violent tone to it, almost like bullets, and again we have that plosive sound, P, which is quite aggressive. So then we have no trees, no shelter, which is an example of parallelism because, the phrases parallel each other. I think this is mostly for emphasis, it just shows, how barren the landscape is. And then, like I said, we have company repeated. That highlights isolation, of course. And then we also have exploding comfortably, which almost rhymes with the previous line's company and seems to highlight a repetitiveness. But it's also an oxymoron, suggesting that the sea is born to explode like that, and perhaps it is the humans who are the intruders. Exploding is also quite a violent, warlike verb, which brings me to something I wanted to point out about the rest of the poem. We have words like salvo, bombarded, strafes, all of which have warlike connotations. So language of war is everywhere in the poem, and I think it relates back to the political turmoil interpretation. Definitely worth talking about. So this is where we have our volta as well. So that point where everything changes. The but no kind of cuts off the original speaking and everything transforms into a bit more of a tone of negativity. Before he was all like, things are okay because we're prepared, and though the wind is going crazy, we're safe, and now it's kind of got the simile. Spit's like a tame cat turned savage, so there's this notion that the sea was at some point tame, which has connotations of being domesticated, how like humans own cats and dogs, domesticated. So it's almost like humans think that they own the sea and have tamed its viciousness, and now savage is obviously negative and has connotations of viciousness too. So the fact that the air is empty kind of proves how ridiculous the war is, I think, or at least Heaney might be trying to say something along those lines. Or the more obvious thing is how powerful wind is, even though it's not visible. Similar to this, we have a huge nothing, which is again an oxymoron. Nothing can't be huge, because, it's nothing, which is why it's strange. He's calling the wind nothing, and we also have that half rhyme of air and fear, which makes it completely clear that there is chaos again, but it also makes there a link between air and fear. We are afraid of the air, the empty air specifically. We are kind of back in a cyclical structure because this is how we started too. It's that idea of being kind of prepared but not having quite as much control as you want to. So Storm on the Island is a difficult one because I couldn't actually find, like I usually end my videos, a critical quote for Seamus Heaney or Storm on the Island. So I'm not actually going to leave you with a little quote today. But I want to say something about it myself, I think, because I think it might inform your analysis a tiny bit. I think that Seamus Heaney is playing with the notion of the futility and uselessness of war here, and I think he's also talking about how it's very corrupt to attack people who are not quite prepared. They might think they are, but they're not. And I think that, of course, is very immoral, and I'm sure a lot of you agree. So, yeah. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you've found this useful. If you have anything else to add, definitely add it, because, you know, literature has no right answer, and I always want to know. So definitely put it down in the comments. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.